Armageddon is the 4th expansion for Crusade in 10th edition. Set during the 4th War for Armageddon, this book brings all new rules and missions for fighting on the surface of a warp-tainted hellscape. Unlike previous installments, this expansion allows you to add its optional hellscape rules to missions outside of this book, which means you can use them on top of any other mission packs, including the new asymmetric missions from Chapter Approved 2025. This book is a much better investment than Nachman Gauntlet, and I can safely recommend this book to you, just for the amount of narrative rules in it. It's packed full of content to help you craft your own narrative, which I personally believe can stand the test of time way into the future of Warhammer. Even if 11th edition completely changes the rules, this book can still serve as a foundation for you to build or adapt your own rules. Now, let us tarry no longer, and let us dive straight into this review, starting with the campaign system. Unlike all the previous Crusade expansions, Armageddon's campaign system is a traditional, structured tree campaign. As usual, there are 3 alliances to split players into: Gatekeepers for the Imperium, Desecrators for Chaos, and Marauders for everyone else. But these are just guidelines. Players and campaign masters should feel free to slot players into different alliances based on player count, balance, or narrative reasons. The Armageddon campaign lasts for 4 campaign phases, and campaign masters should feel free to decide how long each phase lasts, either by counting the number of games played or after a set time period has passed. This is highly dependent on your player base, and there is no hard and fast rule for this. I personally prefer making a phase about 3 weeks long, which allows everyone to get at least 1 game in without losing interest over a long period of time. If you're looking for other considerations, you can watch my Campaign Masters video here, where I walk you through in detail how to assess your player base's preferences. Each alliance will then start at phase 1 of their campaign tree. Each alliance has a narrative goal to work towards in each phase, represented by strategic points. And you gain strategic points by either fulfilling the conditions stated here for each phase, or by completing agendas. At the end of each phase, the alliance with the most strategic points succeeds in their narrative goal, while the others are considered to have failed it. Alliances who succeed in their narrative goal earn 1 campaign point, which we will talk about later. But it's honestly not that important, so let's move on quickly. Succeeding progresses you down the success path, while failing progresses you down the failure path. But whatever the outcome, you will get some kind of reward to go along with it, so you are not punished gameplay-wise for losing too many games. At this point, strategic points are reset to 0, and a new phase begins. This reset is so one alliance doesn't just dominate the entire campaign with an early win. And I really like this system to keep campaign balance. Depending on whether your alliance succeeded or failed their previous narrative goal, you receive a new narrative goal, and players work to earn strategic points again by fulfilling the condition. This cycle repeats until all 4 phases have been completed. In the final campaign phase, the alliance who has the most strategic points wins the entire campaign. This can be a bit swingy in my opinion, and I don't like that it can invalidate your player's previous achievements just because an alliance pulled off a miracle victory in the final phase. But honestly, I do not have an answer for how to make this better. It's either a surprising victory or having one alliance dominate the others through the entire campaign. If you have a suggestion on how to fix this, drop it down in the comments. And feel free to disagree with me as well. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on how to make this better. And that's pretty much the entire campaign system. 4 out of 5 stars. Its simplicity is its greatest strength. You don't have to go through an entire lecture on how campaign rules work before you start playing your games. 40k is an already complex game, and I understand if some people don't want to read through more rules before they get to rolling dice. This tree system makes things much easier to facilitate for both players and campaign masters. Now, let's move on to what makes this book really shine. And that is turning your battlefields into a living hellscape. Everything the warp touches is turned into a nightmarish mess, and that includes the very ground you fight upon. This section presents you with rules to do just that. There are several parts to this. Warp counters, which basically tracks how much warp taint your unit acquires throughout the game. It has no effect on its own, but it does interact with some of the rules in either the Hellscapes or Anomalies. Some battle traits and Crusade Relics also interact with this. But for all intents and purposes, they are just counters. The next part is a warp events chart, which measures how localized the effects of the warp are. Then we have a warp anomalies table which can apply a dizzying amount of random effects to a battle. And finally, a rule we've all been waiting for: Unbound Adversaries, true NPC enemies that roam the battlefield. We'll cover all of these in a bit, but I'd like to make a quick interjection here. I absolutely love the approach this book takes. The Hellscapes, Anomalies, and Unbound Adversaries gives you the option to use these rules outside of the Armageddon warzone. You could theoretically even use them in the new asymmetric missions from Chapter Approved, or even your own homebrew scenario. You could even go back to previous Crusade expansions, like Nachman Gauntlet, and apply a Hellscape on top of it. Imagine how absolutely cooked your reinforcement waves in a Nachman Gauntlet game would be with the scattered coordinates Hellscape. Every unit gains infiltrate and cannot deep strike into the midfield unless your unit performs an action. And for Unbound Adversaries, they've literally created an NPC system for 40k, which were no doubt influenced by Kill Team's own NPC system, and maybe even community-made horde modes. This book even tells you that although these rules were initially for coordinate demons, you can use them to represent any other foe, and you can use any model in your collection to represent them. They even give you a base size guideline for what models you could use. They could represent anything from orcs, Tyranids, Imperial Guard deserters, and Necron flayed ones. Really, anything is possible. I would even encourage you to go so far as to create your own datasheet, or even just steal one wholesale from another codex. These rules are a homebrew heaven, and I highly recommend you use some of these rules in your own casual games to make them more interesting. Now let's start with Hellscapes proper. There are 8 Hellscapes in this book, each one representing a battlefield irreparably changed by the touch of the warp. Every Armageddon Crusade mission in this book uses one of these Hellscapes, and as mentioned earlier, you can use these in any of your other games as well. Every Hellscape has unique effects on your battle, ranging from relatively benign, like Enfolded Space, where you can perform an action to teleport a unit into your opponent's deployment zone, or absolutely devastating, like in Fading Reality, where units can be completely removed from the battle if they have taken more than 2 warp counters. All 8 of these Hellscapes presents unique and crazy modifications to your games. You'll have to adapt the way you play for each one, and if you know what mission you'll be playing beforehand, you should be open to changing your army list to fit the battlefield. If you play scatter coordinates, every unit gets infiltrate, but deep strike is heavily restricted. Therefore, instead of the traditional army construction method of buying transports, you can just load up on elite melee units on foot. Jump pack units immediately become astronomically more dangerous. And also, rolling for attacker defender becomes extremely important, since you'll be dictating the pace of the game with your first infiltrate unit. In the real world, armies are not organized into a single formation template for every mission. While divisions usually have a set organizational structure, they can also be task organized for the mission at hand. A good commander looks at the terrain before them and organizes their troops to accomplish the mission at hand. And I think the same should apply for narrative games. While you're not exactly an army general, the experience of having to analyze the battlefield and optimize your forces puts you into the shoes of a would-be commander. And it's the small things like this that makes narrative games fun. Each battlefield is different, and you will need to adapt in order to survive. Lists that would get absolutely chewed up in tournaments might just become viable in Crusade games. If you want to run 18 Assault Centurions, Scatter Coordinates is the perfect mission for you, since all of them can infiltrate. On the flip side, Tyranid Endless Swarms can absolutely devastate your opponent in Endless Nightmare, as every unit can respawn after being destroyed, provided you roll high enough. But that same Tyranid list would get neutered in Banishing Rifts, where your units can perform a banishing ritual on 2 objectives to send anything between them straight to Detroit.
Take him to Detroit. No! No, not Detroit! No! No, please! Anything but that! No!
You will definitely have many opportunities to do cool things with these missions. And so, I would give this section 5 stars. I personally think this is the way GW should have approached all the Warzone books. They should give us thematic rules to represent the changing battlefields. I mean, how cool would it be to play Tyrannic War, where terrain pieces suddenly attack you? Or Pariah Nexus, where psychic attacks are debuffed and leadership checks become harder? These Hellscape rules are just what I'm looking for in narrative games. Now, as I was going through these, you may have noticed some Hellscapes have this empiric anomaly rule, which I have not covered yet. So what are these? This is the perfect time to move into warp events and anomalies. Empiric anomalies are a type of anomaly. But the warp being what it is, there are many more waiting to ruin or sometimes help your battle plan. In fact, there's a whole table of them. How many anomalies you generate depends on the scale and intensity of localized warp corruption, which you can determine based on this handy wheel of nightmares. Every mission in this book will specify the scale and intensity of warp corruption in the area. Aside from telling you how many to generate, this rule will also inform you when you roll for their effects, either at the start of the battle round or the start of a player turn. If you're using these rules in missions outside of this book, you can also generate warp events by rolling 2d3, one for the scale and the other for intensity. Or you could just agree with your opponent how screwed you want to be. For scale, there are 3 rings, starting from the inside out. First is local, then widespread, then planet-wide. Within these rings are 3 sections: minor, major, and catastrophic. Whether you randomly roll for them, or the mission specifies what to use, you compare the scale against the intensity. This will tell you how many anomalies to generate and when you should roll for these effects. Let's take this first mission, Total Domination, for example. Its warp event is widespread and minor. So on our Wheel of Misfortune, we look at the widespread ring, and then find the minor section underneath it. Thus, we are instructed to get one anomaly, which is rolled for only at the start of the second battle round. Likewise, if I randomly roll for a warp event, and I get a planet-wide catastrophic event, I would therefore get 3 anomalies at the start of the turn. This is something I absolutely would not want to get caught up in. Now that we know how to generate warp events, let's cover anomalies and the random effects they will have on the battle. You must randomly roll for these and resolve their effects, depending on what warp event you get. These effects are resolved before anything else happens. It happens before judgment tokens, before WA, and even tactical objectives if you're playing match play secondaries. This can completely change your battle plan, for good or for worse. Your well-laid strategy may suddenly get thrown out the window if your unit is lost in confusion and unable to shoot. Or you may suddenly be granted an opportunity for a decisive blow, as your unit suddenly gain lethal hits, and you will never know exactly what you're gonna get. To generate an anomaly, roll 3d6 and add its sum. Then compare it to the table here. That will be the effect you are getting. Now that's only for a single anomaly, and you'll have to roll again if you generate a second one. One thing to note is that if you cannot resolve the effect fully for whatever reason, you resolve what you can and then move on. Also, if you roll any duplicates, the effects do not stack. And thank the Emperor for that. I've noticed the anomalies table is split into 2 sections. Well, technically 3. Anything 9 and below is generally bad for you. Anything 12 and above is good. And a 10 or 11 kinda depends, as these empiric anomalies and warp surges depend on whether the Hellscape or mission has any of these effects written into it. I absolutely love this section of the book. It adds so much flavor and unpredictability to your games, which is sorely needed to make 10th edition more fun. You will never have the same game experience twice, and I love that. You'll really feel like the gods of chaos are watching in amusement as you suffer a horrible fate. I really hope that in future Crusade expansions, we get something similar to this. Like maybe an inclement weather DLC with thunderstorms, dust clouds, and toxic atmospheres. There's so much you could do with this theater-wide rules that do not involve resource collection or upgrading your units. And I think that's what this kind of rules section is for. It's to add personality and flavor to the warzone that you are fighting in. The galaxy is a vast place, and every battle, every campaign, should feel like it's bringing you on an adventure across the galaxy. I love what they've done here, and I hope it continues. 5 out of 5 stars with this, with a bonus seal of approval for the precedent that it sets for future Crusade expansions. Moving on to a first for Warhammer 40k, at least from an official GW publication, as far as I can tell. Unbound Adversaries, better known as Hostile NPCs, or NPOs if you've played Kill Team's PvE mode. We've finally got official endorsement from GW on this. However, while these rules are great, I think Poor Hammer's Horde mode and Goonhammer's Fury of the Swarms rules did a much better job fleshing out this NPC system. That said, Unbound Adversaries is a very simple system to pick up for players who don't want to read through too many other publications. You don't need to spend too much time reading through tons of rules documents before you can add these NPCs to your game. And I think that's a recurring theme in this book. It's easy for anyone to take a first glance at and understand what the rules are like on their first read-through. And that's what I like most about this system. Its simplicity. Anyway, what are Unbound Adversaries? They represent the vast hordes of Khorne demons roaming Armageddon, but the book also tells you that you can use these to represent any kind of foe you want. Let us never forget that the orcs are the main antagonists of Armageddon, and they deserve to be recognized. Alternatively, you could use this system to represent feral tyranids in a tyrannic war game. Now, you will find it a little annoying that the datasheets here refer to them as lesser demons and greater demons, but that's honestly just semantics. You can definitely do some mental gymnastics and rename it to whatever you want. There are 4 classes of Unbound Adversaries: lesser demons, abominations, demonic beasts, and greater demons. This table also gives you suggestions on what kind of models these should represent, which you can honestly feel free to ignore and modify according to your heart's desire. Lesser demons don't have to be bloodletters. They could be orc boys. Greater demons don't have to be bloodthirsters. They could be tyrannid trigons. It's all relative. Each of them has their own datasheet, but if they don't suit your taste, maybe because they don't have ranged weapons, even though you would really love for them to have, I recommend you to modify or create your own datasheet using these ones as a guideline. Or better yet, just wholesale replace it with the datasheet of the unit you want it to represent. You could even come up with your own homebrew creatures. Maybe they could be hostile fauna on the planet, or it could even be an alien species that's perhaps native to your planet that has not been documented yet. The sky is the limit when it comes to these rules. And ultimately, these datasheets are just guidelines for you to play and have fun with NPCs in your games. So now that we've touched on what Unbound Adversaries are, how do you decide the quantity of adversaries to use during a battle? Every mission in this expansion uses the Unbound Adversaries rule, and will state exactly what power level of adversaries to bring. But if you're playing your own scenario, you will also need to decide on a power level ranging from 1 to 3. These are not power levels as you know them from 8th edition onwards, but rather a table that you roll on that gives a general guideline of the kind of adversaries and the amount of them to use. For example, in the Total Domination mission, it instructs you to deploy 1 power level 2 adversary in the middle deployment zone. So consult your table here. You can either set up a squad of 4 abominations, or a squad of 3 demonic beasts, depending on what models you have in your collection. If you don't have 4 abominations, you can use 3 demonic beasts instead, and vice versa. If you have both kinds of models, then roll a d6 and see which one to deploy. But now, if you only have 3 abominations instead of 4, don't worry about it. The book advises you to deploy as many as you have in your collection. But if you have none of these models, then the book recommends you to deploy the next tier of units instead, to as much as you have in your collection. Now that's another thing that I appreciate about this system. It doesn't force you to buy more models in your current collection if you don't already have them. In a rare showing from GW, they're not out to milk every single dollar from you just so you can play with their shiny new rules. This book encourages you to use what you have. But I know for a fact that some of you who like this kind of system, you might just go out of your way and buy more models so that you can use them in conjunction with these rules. You could 3D print your own, adapt models from the Old World or Age of Sigmar, or maybe even other game systems. you can really use any kind of model you want. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to use these rules outside of an Armageddon game, you definitely can. If you cannot agree with your opponent how much adversaries you should use, you can always roll a d6 and consult this chart, which will also tell you exactly where to deploy them. Now that you have a bunch of NPCs running around the board, how do they function in-game? They've got an entire player turn to themselves at the start of the battle round. This happens after anomalies and whatever other start of the battle round effects you may have. So it goes Unbound Adversaries, Player 1, then Player 2. The adversary's turn is almost identical to a regular player turn, but with a few modifications. For one, there is no command phase. However, the Unbound Adversaries do have an OC value, and while they cannot hold objectives, they can definitely contest them. So be very careful of where they are, and deal with them accordingly. Otherwise, you may find that you've just lost your objective to a bunch of random lesser demons. The adversaries also do not take battle shock tests and cannot perform actions or gain warp counters. Next up, they take their movement phase as per normal, except they must move as close as possible to an enemy unit, which is basically every other player's unit that is not an adversary unit, and they must move their maximum distance when doing so. Take note that these are only normal moves, not advances. Also, there is no reinforcement step for them, so no deep striking allowed. Then after that, they'll make shooting attacks against the closest enemy unit, and they'll charge the closest enemy unit within 12 inches, even if the long charge is a bad idea. And also, when they charge, they must end that move as close as possible to an enemy unit. So no fancy charges like we do in match play. And then they fight. But there is a very big twist to the fight phase. Only Unbound Adversaries units are eligible to fight, meaning they get to swing, but you don't. Any guesses why? Well, that's because if you could swing against your opponent's units instead of the adversaries, and that'll make it very enticing to get charged by these adversaries. And that'll kinda ruin the whole point of trying to avoid or deal with these things. And you can find yourself in situations where you're deliberately wanting to get charged. So as dumb as it sounds, it does make sense. On the bright side, when it comes to your player turn, the adversaries will not get to swing in your fight phase, so it kinda balances out. So now that we know getting charged by them is a bad idea, you may be wondering, how can I deal with them? Well, luckily for you, Fire Overwatch works against them in their movement phase as well. And the same is true for any other stratagems that refer to an opponent's turn. That means Armor of Contempt, reactive moves, and the like all apply to Unbound Adversaries, with one big exception: Fight on Death. While you could technically use this stratagem in the adversary's fight phase, your units are not eligible to fight, meaning that although you could technically do it rules-wise, you will not be able to enjoy the effects of the stratagem, and so you've spent your CP for nothing. So be very careful about these enemies. You will have to adjust your battle plan a little bit to deal with them, or else you may find one of these annoying little things a major thorn in your side. I love this mechanic very much, and it adds some much needed variance to the game. And it's also simple to organize and play with them, which again I think is its greatest strength. It may not have as much depth as some of the other community-made rules, and their datasheets can be kinda lacking to represent the variety of hostile life out there, but it is decent enough. So I'll give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It's a good system on its own, although depending on your taste, you may want to add more complexity. But it's a good enough system for you to dive straight into or adapt for your own rules. Before we move on to an overview of battle traits and Crusade relics, let's cover something new in this Crusade book, and something new to Crusade altogether, and that is tactical agendas. If you're familiar with matchplay tactical secondaries, it's exactly the same as that, but for Crusade. Instead of choosing 2 fixed agendas, you choose 1 fixed and 1 tactical. At the start of your command phase, generate 1 tactical agenda, which remains active until you achieve it, or if you decide to discard it at the end of your turn. And just like matchplay, you can spend 1 CP to redraw your agenda. It's exactly 1-for-1 with how the matchplay tactical secondaries work. And that's not the only similarity they share. Unfortunately, or I guess some would say fortunately, Games Workshop has chosen not to sell a deck of cards with which you can draw these agendas from. Instead, you will refer to this book and roll a d6. This tells you which table, A, B, or C, to draw from. Then roll another d6 to generate an agenda numbered 1 through 6. It's honestly quite cumbersome, and I know what most of you would do is just print this out on your own and cut them out into cards so that you can draw them just like secondaries. On to the secondaries, tactical agendas. They are almost word for word identical with match play. Storm Sight is basically storm hostile objective. Center Ground is just area denial. There's almost no difference here aside from the name. It's pretty much a copy and paste. Now, while it looks lazy, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but neither is it a groundbreaking new mechanic. It honestly feels like a side grade, and is something that GW is testing the waters with to see how we players would react to it. It's a great way to spread out your XP gain across most of your units, since in Crusade you will often have a few star units gaining all the XP while everyone else is left in the dust. But with tactical agendas, you could potentially gain more than usual if you manage to achieve all 5 of them. But I think for those of us that want something different from match play, you will find it very hard to play with these, just because of how identical they are to secondaries. Now, if they change them to be more thematic, maybe something similar to the kind that you'd find in your Codex or some of the Crusade expansions, then I think we would have something here. But as they are now, I would rate them a 2 out of 5 stars, with a caveat that it is an interesting concept, but execution needs some improvement. I don't think I would have as much of an issue if the tactical agendas were something more thematic or narrative, rather than just a copy-paste from tactical secondaries. I can definitely see this return in future Crusade supplements with this improvement. But as for now, my rating still stands. So now let's move on to battle honors proper. The battle honors in this book are pretty stacked. There's a ton of battle traits for infantry, monster vehicles, mounted beasts, and psychers. Battle traits for epic heroes returns as well, in the form of mighty heroes, following the foundation that Nachman Gauntlet built. Now, going back to battle traits, I quite like them. The issue from Nachman Gauntlet still remains, where some of the traits are tied to campaign mechanics, but it has been slightly improved. They each have a basic effect, with an enhanced version when playing using the Armageddon rules. So now they are less of a dud if you decide not to play with Armageddon Warzone rules. For example, Warp Hunters for infantry units. Your base effect is to reroll once to wound against the closest eligible enemy unit. but if you're targeting an Unbound Adversary unit, you reroll all your wounds. I think this is a very good change. So even if you don't play with Armageddon rules, these traits will still function and may potentially be good enough to take on a unit, even without the enhanced version. Because I am totally not gonna complain if Hormagaunts get a 6+ invulnerable save. The same pattern is repeated with some of the Crusade relics. You get a base effect and an enhanced one. But to be honest, unlike battle traits, Crusade relics are a little worse off once you start taking Antiquity relics and higher. The base effect is alright, but they really shine when you include Armageddon rules. But if you take those away, then suddenly they are not worth the extra Crusade points. For example, the Weapon of Renown relic needs the anti-Unbound Adversaries 4+ rule to function with devastating wounds in order to function as a scary melee weapon. But just having devastating wounds alone is not worth 2 Crusade points. And it gets even worse for legendary relics. The Warp Touch weapon's base effect is +1 attack, strength, and damage, while its enhanced version allows the bearer to remove up to 3 warp counters to add additional attacks and strength based on how many you remove. But outside of Armageddon, it does not justify your Crusade points at all. So I'm gonna rate this section 4 out of 5 stars, but primarily for the battle trait section. If I were to factor in Crusade relics, I think it would be bumped down by 1 or 2 stars. Now finally, we have missions. Although some of the missions look similar to previous missions, the twist is that every mission has a Hellscape, Anomaly, and Unbound Adversary component to it. So although some of the missions and deployments might look similar to Nachman Gauntlet or Leviathan, they will play fundamentally different from all of them because of all these extra add-ons. There's also a ton of rules within the mission that will completely change the way that you might play. For example, in this mission, Empiric Distortion, it looks like a typical search and destroy mission, but there's a line running down the center of the board, which you cannot shoot through until a warp anomaly hits. Normally, you would never consider running out to the middle of the board turn 1, but in this game, it might be worth it to be more aggressive like that until you trigger an anomaly. But first, you'll have to contend with the Unbound Adversaries floating around no man's land. So now you have a choice to make. Do you be aggressive and push to the mid-board so that you could shoot or charge your opponent? Or do you wait for the distortion to drop before you start making your move, playing defensively, knowing that the enemy will be using the distortion to their advantage? Or take this other mission for example, which is looking to be my personal favorite, Brazen Bridge. I mean, just look at this map. That grey area on the sides is a chasm, and no terrain features can be set up there, nor can deep strike units, or even units with fly, land in this cavern. Also, Unbound Adversaries will be crawling out from the chasm onto the battlefield. How cool is that? The middle of the board is the Brazen Bridge. You can just picture your forces trying to siege a fortress on the other side, trying desperately to cross while dodging demons that are climbing out from the pits of hell itself. Now imagine your enemies sally forth from their defenses and you both meet in a violent melee on the bridge itself. Isn't that the most cinematic thing that could happen on the tabletop? I really do think that GW did an amazing job with the missions here. And a big bonus here is that if you choose to remove all the Hellscape effects, anomalies, and Unbound Adversaries from the mission, they still play decently well, thanks to the unique effects in the mission themselves. Although for optimal fun, I recommend that you don't remove any of the rules. This was a major complaint I had in Nachman Gauntlet. If you remove the expansion's rules because you didn't like them, the majority of the missions would just become broken, unless you did some serious rework of the wording so that you could score objectives as intended. But that is not the case with Armageddon missions. You could choose to play these missions even without the Hellscape rules. While I recommend that you play with all these rules as intended, I can understand if some of you may not like the demon flavor to them, and instead choose to remove some of the warp-related rules. Either way, I think you would still find these missions a lot of fun. And that is the most important thing when it comes to Crusade and narrative games. It is to just have fun. So I will give a stunning 5 out of 5 stars for the missions. Overall, I really like this Crusade expansion. After Nachman Gauntlet, I didn't exactly have high hopes for this expansion, but I'm truly glad that I was wrong. This expansion blew me out of the water with the way that they handled the rules and gave us optional rules to play with, and even adapt for our own rules. All these missions look fun to play, and I can definitely see myself playing these even beyond 10th edition. Speaking of which, do I recommend this book even though 10th edition looks to be ending next June? Surprisingly, I would say absolutely yes. For the amount of interesting rules here, I highly recommend that you pick this book up, even though it probably only has 1 year left of its life cycle before 11th edition rolls around and potentially does another big reset. The optional rules for Hellscapes Anomalies and Unbound Adversaries are highly modular, and you can easily break apart, rewrite, and adapt them for your own rules. And it also helps that while they are inherently warp flavored, the rules can be reskinned to whatever flavor you want. You could reskin warp anomalies to biodegradations if you're in a 4th Tyrannic War setting, where the world is slowly dying to the Great Devourer, instead of it being warp anomalies. Hellscapes can also be reskinned to something like Stilled Worlds to represent the Pariah Nexus' maddening effect on life as we know it. These rules serve as a fantastic foundation for your own adaptations to play in whatever campaign you want to play. And that is the single greatest value that this book gives us. And it is for that reason alone that I highly recommend you pick this book up. You will definitely have lots of fun with the rules as is, and you will have something that will stand the test of time because of how inspired its rules are, and how conducive the rules are to bring to life your narrative setting. And now with that will conclude this video. And as always, thank you for watching. I will probably do a battle report with this Crusade expansion in some time to come. I'm planning to borrow a friend's World Eater's army to fight my Black Templars. But in the meantime, I'm still writing the Curse of the Ungal story. It was totally unplanned, but since some of you enjoyed the battle report so far, and because I've now put in quite a bit of time developing the setting, I want to see it to completion. The next episode will be a kill team game to focus more specifically on certain personas in the story, but I won't tell you exactly who those are. I want to try playing more kill team games because it gives us the chance to spend time with a smaller group of characters rather than the sweeping battles of main 40k. I will probably come up with some proof of concept videos with kill team, just to kind of build on and adapt what I've learned from Shadows Born of Light episode 1. It'll also give us a chance to experience a more intimate kind of war? I can't wait to experiment and let you experience a cinematic kill team game. But as for Curse of the Ungal Episode 3, I do want to focus on the quality of the writing. Since we're going to be exploring some of the characters more deeply, I want to make sure that there is a cohesive theme based on the development in the last 2 episodes. And I think in terms of episode release schedule, I probably will not do it back to back like I did with Shadows Born of Light. I will probably release 1 episode, and then we'll have a few ad hoc games or these kind of general Crusade videos in between, just to break up the monotony of the episodes. And who knows, maybe some of the narratives in the ad hoc games will become stories of their own. It kinda depends, I guess. But we'll see, because I think some stories are better served as one-offs, rather than trying to force something to become a series. But anyway, that is all I have. And as always, thank you for watching, and until next time, I will see you on the battlefield.